Good day, and welcome to the next session. Before we begin, let's invoke a reminding and remembering of our teachers and our teachers' teachers. So lowering the gaze or closing the eyes completely. Maybe finding that point within yourself where you can begin to remember those who have been teachers to you. Om Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. And lifting your gaze or opening your eyes. Today we start with the next yama associated with Sutra 237, Asteya. So again, we come with a word that has that a at the beginning, denoting that there is a negation of the root word, which in this case is steya or stealing. And so this particular Sanskrit word asks us to consider non-stealing and non-taking of that which doesn't belong to us. And there's two ways in which we can consider Asteya. We can consider it from the viewpoint of interactions with other and with self. So we'll start with other. So you probably associate this first off in the top of your head in the stealing of tangible things or objects from another person. However, you can also steal intangible things, such as emotions or information from another. And sometimes these are driven by envy and jealousy, and they could be the root to tangible or intangible stealing. To me, this is a form of unseen power, or a power dynamic could be part of this equation. So you can imagine that if there's this underlying energy of power and so forth, that it then creates a dynamic of disconnection. And so when you consider our world right now, and you can probably think for a moment of a scenario where there has been a taking of what is not rightfully someone's. So just take a moment to think of a situation like that. And then can you see how this may lead or has led to a form of disconnection? I would say that some of our biggest issues in the modern world are a result of taking things that were not rightfully someone's. So let's think of it more in relationship to you and your relationships when you're in relation with someone else. So I'll give you 3 potential examples where you could consider how you steal from another or take without being conscious. So one is time. So this could be being consistently late. All right, so there's someone that is always on time to pick you up, or maybe they're even early, but you never seem to quite be ready for them. Even maybe if they're running a little bit late, you still seem to not be quite. I have a friend of many, many years ago who I really came to understand this concept, because I would always show up early to pick her up because we were in separate cities driving towards another destination for these women's circles we would go to. And it never seemed that she could ever be ready, even if I was running late. So we could be on our journey in a timely way. And then, of course, that created a ripple effect with the group, because then we were always late and so forth and so on. So that's just one consideration. Now, if you flip that and you think about honoring time boundaries, So imagine if you've ever been in a relationship where, someone's very good at setting boundaries of saying, I can meet, but I can only meet for this amount of time because their schedule is very packed or whatever it is. But they're very clear. And somehow this just escapes you. And even when you know that hour is up, you don't even consider saying, hey, don't you have to go now? So that's another example. Another example would be our attention. So a way of depriving attention and not giving attention, stealing attention away from someone could be picking up the phone and just looking at the phone when you're with them and never really giving them full eye gaze, full engagement. This is one way of holding back generosity and presence with someone. Another one could be, instead of depriving energy, it could be a holding of energy. So have you ever had someone in your life who, when they come to see you, it's like they have to tell you their whole life story, and what they do, some people call an energy dump, where they just dump it all? Or have you ever done that, where you just are so craving that need for connection and needing somebody to hear you, and unconsciously or consciously you begin to dump everything that's happening in your life in conversation with them? So those are two examples: time, attention, and then the third is misrepresenting. And currently I'm in a PhD program, and I think about this a lot because of plagiarism in writing and so forth. But think about it in a way, if you're a yoga teacher, do you share your teacher's teachings as your own without any acknowledgement? Or is there any way in which you do this in any form? Maybe at your work, you know that the idea was somebody else's at work, and you say it's yours. Or you don't give them credit. You don't necessarily say it's yours, but you don't necessarily give them credit or honor. Okay? So that's when we're considering that act of stealing from another. So let's go to the other side of that, and the self. Okay? So if you want, you could take out your pen and paper right now. I'm going to ask you two questions, and you could write them down and or just write your answers. So the first one is, can a lack of faith in oneself rob future potential? So you could think about it for yourself. Is there a way in which I rob myself by having less faith in myself? If that one doesn't really speak to you, think of this one. Or, can dissatisfaction with oneself lead one to gaze and look elsewhere? I'm sure you can kind of understand where that might be going. So in the first question, can a lack of faith in oneself rob future potential? Consider how one may steal from their opportunity to grow themselves into the person that they know they could, that maybe they don't know, but they have the right and the capacity to be. So that's one way. And then dissatisfaction with oneself, leading to that gazing. It's when we take from someone, it is usually in response to a deeper experience of emptiness. And the sages tell us this. And that's part of what these practices are about, is recognizing if there is that emptiness within, how is it truly fulfilled? What will truly generate a sense of enoughness for you? So maybe that's another little question you could write down, or just write a quick response to. What truly generates enoughness for me? So I have a teacher once, and I did not write down who this is. I had it in old notes, but a teacher once talked about how we have holes in our life, okay? And that when we aren't fulfilled, everything just kind of leaks out through those holes. And usually these holes appear due to loss, some kind of deeper loss we've had in our life, or unfulfilled desires, or a sense of lacking, or feeling insecure, or jealous, or resentful of someone else can create all these holes. And that attempt to plug up those holes may happen through taking on any of the levels. It could happen through taking attention. It could happen through taking someone's time. It could happen. So you can probably think of multiple ways in which that could happen. So that that's what happens. And what the sages asks us, and what these sutras and many of the texts asks us instead is there a way that we can notice the nectar, the amrita of life? So instead, there is a connection and a sense of enoughness, a sense of wholeness. This is a really easy thing to just say, much harder to take in and figure out. So just give yourself time with that, okay? So one other piece I just want to share, there are some other writings I have that I've kept through time, but they talk more to the deeper meaning of Asteya that goes beyond stealing from others. And it speaks more, again, to that emptiness we feel inside, those holes, that lack of fulfillment that is within, and how it creates dynamics where we wish to fill those holes and end up stealing from others and sometimes ourselves. So according to the sages, when we don't have confidence in ourselves, we look for it in the approval, so that could be that attention part, of others. And then this steals away from our own potential as well. I'm trying to think if I can come up with an example. So when we doubt ourselves, so for example, when we say, I can't, without ever even attempting, there's no even trying, okay? I can't. There's no possible way. We are stealing from ourselves when we don't even attempt to try. Okay? Because when we say, I can, the possibility becomes lost. So understanding these underpinnings of Asteya and how they influence our lives opens us up to the potential to seeing that innate nature that lives deep within us. And that innate nature, when we're connected with it and we're unified with it, how it guides us to needing to attain nothing, materially or otherwise. Okay? So when you do start the brave journey of trusting and listening to ourselves, we start to turn away from this practice of stealing, and we move towards Asteya and non-stealing. We come to greater depths of knowing ourselves and as we interact with others. So I just wanted to share this quote with you. I'll have you a moment to read. I'm going to take a little drink. That's supposed to say we live, not if. Sorry. So we live in a culture that encourages one to amass, attaching value to objects and leading to possessiveness and the fear of loss. So what if instead you, I, any of us, all of us, don an attitude of caretaker instead of owner? So in the end, the realization is how this is a grand play, or lila, as it's called, and the ultimate reality of what is vital in life becomes known to us. Just pausing for a moment to consider that. All right. So scribble any last notes that you need to scribble from that section. And then I'm going to invite you to sit back into your seat. And I'm going to take you through a little visualization reflection. If at any point during this you feel you want to record something to remember, you could pause and or just make a quick scribble on the side, all right? So again, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or lower your gaze. Take a few breaths to ground down into that place of quiet within. And think of an impulsive action you took recently when you felt sad or angry or lonely. So it's not, again, about judging ourselves. It's just about a recognition, a noticing. And if you can, I'm going to invite you to now imagine being in that same scenario in the future sometime. So begin to notice it play out, whether it's with yourself or another. And what if instead of reacting immediately, you waited just a moment or more? This time, listening to your deep inner knowledge. See if you can identify what you really feel in that moment, or what you really need in that moment. If you haven't yet started to write anything down and you feel you need to, I'm going to invite you to raise your gaze or open your eyes and take a few moments to record what you need to record. You could pause here if you need more time. So that awareness that you conjured up during that visualization is how you start to cultivate an understanding of what's at the root of inner peace for you. And that's one of the gifts of both Asteya and Brahmacarya, which is the next sutra. Sutra 238 focuses on Brahmacarya. And I'll just pull this forward so you can read the quote if you want from the Bhagavad Gita. But according to this sutra, Sutra 238, consider the translation of this word. So maybe you've heard of it as something related to chastity or celibacy. But more generally, it's also considered something related to a modification of senses, a respect for the divine or divinity. So it implies artfully living a moderate life and moderation of the senses, so a sense of balance can flourish and be found. It is also about bringing an awareness of sacredness into one's life. So if you consider for yourself what does living in alignment with Brahmacharya look like for you, or where are the challenges that you find yourself in trying to live aligned with Brahmacharya, that modification of senses in the modern world. It's very difficult because there's so much to do and so much to take on in this modern world, right? So where does that moderation live? So technological advances have created an environment where our activities no longer depend on the time of day or the day of the week or the week of the month or the season or anything. Coming and living here in rural Germany, I am reminded of that seasonal cycle since I am amongst farmers everywhere. And I can tell now where they're resting in the dead of winter and how, in a few months their tractors will be everywhere and the fields will be stirring and you will smell the dirt as you drive by. It will be, so there's a rhythm to life. And what I'm curious about for you is What is that rhythm and how do you moderate? So you're paying attention to that rhythm. You're not stealing from one season to the next what's there available to you. So one of my questions I have for you is, do you notice when your senses are driving you? And when you do you notice how they bring you into or out of balance? And as mentioned also in Asteya, can you connect to where there is a sense of enoughness? So just taking a moment to reflect on those. Do you notice your senses and how they drive you? Does this bring you into balance or imbalance, and how? And when we connect Brahmacarya and Asteya, where is that sense of enoughness? Where are the holes filled so you feel fulfilled? So, some of you are probably thinking, isn't Brahmacharya about sex? So, during the time that the sutras, some of the first translations of the sutra happened, there was a very puritanical mindset in more English-speaking countries. And so if it was an English translation, this was a time when celibacy was celebrated and so forth. And so some of the translations that happened at that time associated this more with sex than a moderation of senses or sensory inputs. Okay? So again, it goes back to what we've talked about multiple times now. Each translation brings with it a history. The person who wrote the translation, the influences of the culture and time. So these are all things to consider when you read the different translations of the sutras. Okay? So, and then back in that time, during those puritanical times, there was a consideration that the lack of celibacy, withdrawing from, was a quicker and faster way to connection with divinity and the divine. So again, contextual consideration of that. So how do you translate Sutra 238? How do you translate it in relevance to modern times? So as you can see, at one time it was defined in one way, and another time it was defined in another way. So I ask you to consider right now, for you, in this modern world, at this time, what could Brahmacharya mean to you? From that moderation of senses to the respect for the divine, you could consider how you develop a respect of vital energy versus a lack of ability to be in balance and moderation with life. Or how do you hold faith and devotion? And then how do you take that holding into the world with an awareness of sacredness? So today we're going to conclude. Instead of with just an Om, I'm going to introduce you to another mantra. And you may have spoken this mantra before. And as you can see, there are several marks and things to consider. And I know you know one of the marks, the mark that's over that character, you know as an A. And as you remember, it does what when that is on there? It doubles the length. So the other thing to consider is that on the last repetition of the word Shanti, that there is a soft release of breath versus a long tonal holding out. So it'll sound something like Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So we're not drawing out that E sound. That's contradictory to the way in which one of my teachers explained that Sanskrit originally intended for those last sounds to be made. We'll leave it at that. So the reason it's chanted 3 times or spoken 3 times is because it is acknowledging, as you can see on this screen, it is acknowledging peace in the body, peace in speech, and peace in the mind. It is also a hope for peace individually, collectively, and universally. So again, I'm going to invite you to put down your pens and papers. Find your comfortable seat. And what I'll do is we'll take 3 inhales and exhales. And I'll say inhale, and then you can do it with me, starting with the Om. So drawing the breath in and out 3 times. And on this 3rd time, on the exhale, we will speak the words. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Then when you're ready, we will say goodbye. And I will see you in the next session.